Well, it is good to be back at church. I know many of you will want to be back at church as well. But over the past 3 months, really, Susan and myself have been settling into our new role as no longer the lead pastors here. And first of all, let me just say, I have been so encouraged just with what has been the calm, steady leadership of Jeff and Megan through what have been crazy COVID times. And also a thank you to Vic and Irene, Paul and Ronnie, Ed and Elaine, who've also been a part of a great team of elders and leaders in supporting them and working with them as well. So we are so blessed as a church in terms of the leadership that we have here. And so I guess just a quick question. So what have you been up to, Vern? Well, just briefly, on Monday to Wednesdays, I have been working online. I have been building an online coaching and mentoring business, really where I'm working with guys from Australia and all over North America on Zoom meetings individually and as groups, really working with men who are struggling with addictions and difficult marriages, and really in recovery, helping men put their lives back together. And so I have been doing that on Monday to Wednesday. I've got 10 guys that I'm working with right now. On Thursday and Friday, it's been really strange. I've been going back into the public school system as a teacher on call, which is really weird after, 17 to 20 years of being out of the classroom. I know I've taught some of your kids. And but you know what? I was really nervous, but it's actually gone much better than I feared. So that's been really good. And now on the weekend, I get to come back and slip into this speaking rotation here at the church and taking my turns at different times. And let me just say again, I've loved the Sunday morning teaching that we've received here from Jeff, but more specifically, Megan's done more of the teaching, and I found it nuanced. I found it biblical. I found it super helpful. And it's so easy for me to slip into this series now. It's a little bit like a slow pitch for me to hit. And a few weeks ago, Megan laid out the new series that we're starting in 2021, which is called This Is Us. And it was taking the defining sermon of Jesus, the Sermon on the Mount, which is really the clearest summary of how Jesus' followers are to live their lives. You could describe it as a bit of an operating manual. This is the operating manual of what Christians are to look like. If you want to know what a Christian lifestyle is, it is summarized in Matthew 5-7. I heard a podcast recently described it as calling it the kingdom politic. You could say that this passage is about the politics of Jesus. And when I use that word politics, I'm referring to how we live our life and how we relate to those around us. There was a great podcast by Mike Erie that I'm borrowing a few things from this morning called the Vox Podcast, and Megan referenced him. And he has this great podcast where he lays out how Jesus' politics are neither left, that's my left, your right, are neither left nor right nor religious. They operate completely on a different plane. And so that is just, I've been thinking about that. I'm going, yeah, it's political, but it's not partisan. Another book that I picked up, which was really interesting, it was by Skye Jethani, and the name of the book was, What If Jesus Was Serious? And he wrote the book because when he taught his Sunday school classes and he read this passage that we've been working through, a lot of Christians would go, you know what? This is really good stuff. But Jesus doesn't exactly intend for us to live like this, does he? You know, Jesus isn't really serious. I mean, there's no way that you could live this way people would respond to him. This isn't the way life works. This isn't the way the world around us works. We actually can't do this. This is impossible. And Skye's book was written to try to push back on that type of minimization and say, no, no, no. As Megan laid out the first week, Jesus says very clearly, blessed are you if you put these things into practice in your life. Jesus very much intended that this would be our kingdom operating manual. So, we are going to talk about this blessed life. And over the next little while, I'm going to take 3 topics, easy ones. Today, I'm looking at anger. 2 weeks from now, I'm looking at lust. And then on Valentine's Day, I think I have divorce. So thanks very much, Megan, for those topics. No, actually, I help volunteer for that. But as part of that, those are the 3 topics that I get to do. I think next week, Jeff's doing humility and meekness. And so this is going to be really interesting as we dive into these passages. So today, we're going to talk about anger, but we're flipping it on its head because I want to present everything in a positive spin. So instead of calling a sermon on anger, we're going to say, this is us. We are reconcilers. So we're going to express everything in the positive way. So let's look at today's reading, and then we'll take a little bit of time and unpackage it. I'm reading from Matthew 5, starting at verse 21. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fires of hell. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and then remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you are still together on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. So, Lord, teach us this morning. Give us open ears and open hearts. So, as we take this passage, Jesus starts by referencing a common heavy command that everybody would have known and understood. And it was the passage around murder. He says in verse 21, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, it's one of the 10 commandments, by the way, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. So murder was really clear. You know, that was basically the intentional taking of another's life. It's different than war, and it's different than unintentional. But if you murdered somebody, then you were subject to really reciprocity, the same judgment, death for death, coming back to you. So everybody would be familiar with that. But then Jesus references a lighter command, a command which would be seen as a lighter command, but he equates the two. And then he goes on in verse 22 and says this, but I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Now, Jesus is not making up a new command here. He's actually referencing another Old Testament command. In Leviticus 19:17, it says this, do not hate a fellow Israelite in your heart. So Jesus uses heavy commands and light commands. He puts them all together. And as we referenced in the first week, Jesus shows, I am the embodiment of this whole law, the whole Torah. I encompass all of it, and I'm going to teach you what this means. And what he's saying here is the way you understand and live out these passages is by, first of all, examining not your actions, but your heart. Remember that? 1917, do not hate a fellow Israelite where? in your heart. So Jesus, in this whole passage, is going to make this comment where he says, don't just look on the outward actions of your life. Examine your heart, because there you will find and you will discover the heart of the problem. Now, it's interesting. Jesus could have used a couple different words for anger here. And there's a couple different words that are used in the Bible. And I'm pulling this from the Vox podcast. The first word is thumos, which Jesus isn't referencing here. And thumos is a kind of anger. You know, you strike a match and it flares up and then quickly dissipates. That is thumos anger. Any of you parents who have teenagers or young kids know a little bit about thumos maybe as an adult. I mean, we don't like to tell tales on ourselves, but we've all experienced thumos anger. I had that happen to me this last week. I got an email from somebody, and immediately it made me angry. And I know my kids came to recognize I bite my tongue, and I get flushed. They used to, I bit my tongue, they used to all run. Because when I thumos, when I get, it was just this instinctive anger. And I banged out a response with my fists on the keyboard. And I looked at my response. I looked at it again. And then I remember a wise thing that Vern once told me. Don't ever send something within 24 hours if it makes you angry. I sighed and hit delete. Thumos anger. But then there's another type of anger, and that is the type of anger that Jesus is referencing here, which is really the purpose of this passage, and that is the anger of orge, which is an ongoing state of angering. He who is given, or she who is given, into anger. If you are given over to anger, you are usually currently angry. Here's a great quote. If everything bugs you, then everything is not the problem. If everyone bugs you, then everyone is not the problem. This kind of angering is what Jesus refers to. This is the kind of anger that Jesus says leaves us prone to judgment. It's when anger is welcomed and practiced and rehearsed. When we put out a welcome mat for anger in our lives. Now, a lot of people have wrestled, well, what does that mean when it says prone to judgment? I mean, that's a really scary part of this passage. And I love what you said last week or the week before, Megan. I can't do theological gymnastics to try to, talk this away. What does judgment mean? Well, I think it at least includes, I know I don't want to experience it. Let's start with that. It's not a good thing. And I guess it could mean experiencing God's loving discipline. That's one thing to put about it. It could be to live or fall short of the grace of God, which is what Hebrews talks about. It could be to live outside of God's active blessing and fail to see God's intended work in our lives in some area. Or it can simply mean the physiological effects on our own human bodies. In one sense, anger is its own judgment. I'm going to put this picture of the drinking water here. Recently, a official in the town of Flint, Michigan was criminally found responsible for allowing the people to drink dangerous water. Basically, the pipes had been leaching dangerous neurotoxins into the water, and over 100,000 people were exposed to these toxins. And they continually told people, oh, the water's fine, the water's fine, the water's fine, you don't have to worry about it. And what happened is these toxins, like lead and others, they built up in the human body and then created all sorts of problems, especially with children. but the entire population experienced this. And what happened is as those toxins built up, they had all sorts of physical ramifications. I got a biologist here, so I got to be careful. I'm okay so far. Okay, so far I don't step past that. It's not good to have these in your body. And I would say to you, anger is a similar toxin in our body. The interesting thing, though, is as Christians, we have all sorts of great spiritual ways to justify our anger. Now, I'm just going to pull two out here. We're very creative as Christians. We could probably come up with 10 ways to justify anger, but I'm just going to give you two that I've heard and that I have practiced before. Here's the first one. You don't understand. My anger is righteous. I am standing up for truth, for a righteous cause. Take your pick of whatever causes that is. Well, that's interesting response to that. I want to preface this bit by talking about put a picture of my favorite barnyard animal up here. I grew up where we had a lot of cows and we had bulls. Now, I got to name the cows, and this wasn't exactly a picture because this one's called Apollo, but I remember the last two bulls we had. The first one I called Floyd, and then that one died, and I called the next one Floyd too. I was not very creative. But I never figured out, what that ring around the nose was for. Was it like an ornament that you see some people wear? Actually, that's not the case. And the ring around the bull's nose is through what's called the septum. Of course, any of you who've had nose rings would probably know that. And that is a very sensitive area of your body. And what happens is that ring is a safety measure. And you can use that ring to maneuver people, to control them, and bring them into submission. I would submit to you that we are all susceptible, myself including, to having somebody place a ring in our nose, especially around anger. I read a study recently that verified what every successful politician, talk show host, news pundit, podcaster has found out. The best way to bond somebody to you and your point of view is to make them angry about the same things that you are angry about. It's even more effective than fear. If you can make somebody angry, you can wed them to yourself because they're angry about the same things that you're angry about. So if you want to get people committed to your cause, then stoke a grievance, make them angry, and as a result, they will see the world as you see the world. And I would say, as I look around, these, what I call angering environments, they are such a part of what we listen to, what we watch. They are just second nature to us now. We live in an angry culture. Everybody is angry. Be angry. Be very angry. Why aren't you angry? I heard somebody describe the culture. We live in a culture of outrage porn. It's a great phrase. What do you mean, outrage porn? Things that stir us up. I've had people angry at me because I'm not angry about the things they're angry about. Why aren't you angry about these things? If we can create anger around the same things, we can create a very tight tribe. And we have contempt and anger for everybody who we are angry at because they are from a different tribe. They literally are the enemies. There's us versus those we're angry at. The good guys versus the bad guys. These are the angering environments that are second nature in our culture. Another picture that came to mind for Al, you probably will recognize this, being a nurse, walking around the hallway with an IV drip. Now, fortunately, he's got a very decent, unlike some of those back ones, we don't see his bottom, but walking around. And as I was thinking about this, we literally have anger dripping into our very bloodstream every day. And we walk around in an angering IV drip. It's interesting. Skye Jethani talks about this. He says our culture is addicted to anger. But this is not to characterize the people of God. So that's the first one. I am justified in my anger. This is a righteous anger. That's the first justification Christians use. And we walk around with our IV drip and just have anger dripping into our system all day long. Here's the next one. Yeah, but wasn't Jesus angry? I like to think that this is the anger of Jesus that I'm expressing right now. So here's a test. What did Jesus get angry with? And what did he do with that anger? Now, there's actually 3 specific times where the Bible literally says Jesus got angry. I'm not going to talk about the temple. Jeff's going to deal with that one next week. But there's 3 specific situations where it literally says Jesus got angry. First one was when the Pharisees didn't want Jesus to heal a man with a shriveled hand in the temple. The second one, when Jesus' disciples kept the kids from Jesus, that got Jesus angry. You'll like that one, Zoe. And the third one was when Jesus was outside the tomb of Lazarus and people's response to his invitation, what he wanted to do. Those 3 times it says Jesus was angry. So you say, okay, then what did Jesus do with that anger? Well, he blasted them, right? Well, actually, no. What Jesus did, he did and operated in exactly the opposite spirit. He healed the men in the temple. He welcomed the children, and he raised Lazarus from the dead. Now, here is the truth of the matter. I trust Jesus to wield and use anger properly. I do not trust myself to do the same. I feel a much wiser and productive course for my life is to not operate in anger. In fact, whenever I've done it as a pastor over the years, it never has had good results. Which is probably why James says to us that anger does not accomplish the purposes or the righteousness of God. So, some of you are now, like me, are getting a little hot under the collar. Going, oh, okay, maybe I got to re-examine my relationship with anger a little, just a little. Well, where do I start? Well, I'm going to give you the 2 applications that Jesus gives in this passage. And the first one is the name of the sermon, is we are reconcilers. Reading at verse 23, it says this, "Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift." Now, we might miss the craziness of what Jesus is saying here because we don't understand the geography of Israel. Where Jesus is giving these instructions to people is in northern Israel. It's about a 3-day walk from Jerusalem. Bible question, where did you make your offering? In the temple at Jerusalem. So what Jesus is saying here, when you walk 3 days to Jerusalem once a year to give your offering, and you provide your animal to the priest, and he goes to kill the animal as an offering for you and your family, and you suddenly remember that your brother back up in northern Israel has something against you, go, oh, whoa, stop it. time out. Just hold on. What you do is you walk those 3 days back to northern Israel. You make things right with your brother. You walk the 3 days back to Jerusalem. And you say, okay, now you can go ahead. And you go, well, surely, and this is partly where people start diminishing or excusing what Jesus, surely Jesus wasn't serious. Surely he wasn't literal here. Well, you got to understand, just because Jesus uses hyperbole doesn't mean he's not serious. Jesus is deadly serious here. And that's going to matter in 2 weeks when we get to cutting off body parts. This is also important. The point here is this: anger is cancer. And anger will destroy you and will destroy your relationships. And the state of your heart as it relates to you and your brother, and the absence or presence of anger, is more important than any worship, ceremony, or song or activity that you do. That is way more important to God, even if it meant a 6-day journey to get things right with your brother. Is that challenging to live out? Oh, you better believe it. You know what's especially challenging in this passage? I'm just being flat out honest with you here. I could get it if Jesus said, I could deal with it if Jesus says, if you recognize that you have anything against somebody else, go and make it right. Okay, I like that one because I'm a little more in control of that. But he makes it the bar even higher. He says, if you recognize that somebody has something against you. Oh, I've wrestled with this. 25 years of pastoring, I probably got a list of people who've got something against me. And I've wrestled with this. God, what do you want me to do with that? I know I've failed people, I've disappointed people, God, how do I deal with that? It's, I don't dismiss it. And to this point, the best I could do is Romans 12:8. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. So that's where I'm at. And when God brings somebody or puts his finger on me, and then I try to make it right. I've had conversations with people about events that have happened years earlier. Are we good? How did you do it? Can we patch things up, or where are we at? If it's, I try to be true to what God's saying here. So that's the first one. The first one is be reconcilers. Here's the second one. We befriend others. Now, this is where it's going to get even more difficult. 25 says, settle matters quickly with if you've got a pencil, your adversary. That's an important word. Your adversary is taking you to court. Do it while you're still together on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will not get out until you paid your last penny. So, your adversary, these are people you have disputes with. These are people that are on opposite sides of an issue with you. Well, what do we deal with that? How are we reconcilers with our adversaries? Well, Matthew 5:40 gives this crazy advice. If anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. Excuse me, but what if he was in the wrong and I was in the right, you say? Here's another one, 1 Corinthians 6:7. And this is where Paul is chastising 2 Christians who are involved in a legal dispute. The very fact that you have lawsuits among you, this is 1 Corinthians 6:7, means that you have been completely defeated already. Why not rather be wronged? Why not rather be wronged? Excuse me? I have my rights, Jesus, why not just rather be wronged? Why not rather be cheated? Because it's wrong. You look at that and you go, excuse me, I've got my rights. I got to fight for what's right. Jesus says, lay it all down. God is in control. And you realize, oh my goodness, this is a kingdom ethic? I would much rather fight for what I think is mine and what I think is right. I'm not sure I like this very much at all, Vern. Jesus says, welcome to the kingdom politic. This is how the people of God are to live. Oh, well, that's not practical. The world doesn't work that way. That's how we are to live as Christians. Interesting how Mike Ear takes this word adversary and he really plays on it, and he talks about who is your adversary? Because he talks about winning your adversary over. Well, your adversary in this world are people that have completely contrary values to you. They don't believe what you believe. They're on opposite sides of a political or a sports, not sport, but they just believe everything you don't believe, and the things you hold in value, they think are dumb. And they're working directly against your interests. And what he's saying here is Christians should be the very first ones to befriend those who you consider to be adversaries. One of the most amazing examples I ever saw of this was a vineyard pastor from Cincinnati. His name was Steve Sjogren. And Steve Sjogren started the servant evangelism movement. And he did that by simply walking down the street and offering to wash and clean people's bathrooms. But he started to do that. He's walking down the street. And he was walking down the street, and guess what he came to? He came to the adult bookstore that was owned by the largest pornographer in Cincinnati, who was the brother of the publisher of the largest pornographic magazine in America. And he said to Mr. Flint, can I come in and wash your bathrooms in your adult bookstore? And the guy says, excuse me, who are you? He says, I'm Steve Sjogren, I pastor at the Cincinnati Vineyard. You're in here? Says, yeah, I come to wash your bathrooms. Over a period of time, he became a close friend of Mr. Flint, and they developed a friendship. Well, what do you mean? He is an enemy of everything that Christians hold true. Well, Steve didn't just stop there. He kept going. And eventually, he came to the Planned Parenthood abortion clinic. Wow. And there were Christians out with pickets and trying to stop people from getting in. Steve brought a bucket of water, and he began to wash the abortion doctors' cars. Guess who was furious with him? The Christians. How dare you do something? These are evil people. These are baby murderers. Befriending your adversary. I want you to put a picture up of this fellow here. His name is Daryl Davis. Daryl Davis is a blues musician, and he traveled around playing blues music. And one day he was playing in a bar, and a white man approached him and said, how did you learn to play like that? You sound just like Jerry Lee Lewis. And the guy says, I've listened to Jerry Lee, but actually the guy that I've learned more from is Fats Domino. Fats Domino, does he play? Yeah, don't you listen to any black music? Are you kidding? And they begin to know each other, and the guy that Daryl talked to, the guy says, well, actually, I don't, you're the first black person I've ever talked to. The guy says, why is that? He says, I'm a part of the Ku Klux Klan. The guy says, you're joking. He pulled out his card and showed him his membership to the KKK. And over a period of time, he befriended that man. And that man, through friendship, came to a point where he says, I can no longer be in the KKK. He took his robes and gave them to Daryl. Over time, what's happened is 200 people. Daryl was so impacted by that he's made a life mission of befriending people in the KKK. Over 200 people, part of the KKK, white supremacists who stand against everything that he believes, have given him their uniforms as a sign of friendship with him. Befriending someone with whom you see as an enemy is getting outside of your echo chamber and your shared grievances and learning to walk in the shoes of somebody that you see as the enemy. Who is an adversary who you've befriended? And let me give the last third application. Jesus didn't put this one in, but I think it's certainly relevant in 2021. I would say this: cut back on the things that fuel your anger. You know what? I've come to realize anger is addictive. And if you struggle with drinking anger, maybe it's time to stay out of the bar. I went to AA for an entire year just to learn about AA. Alcohol never was my drug of choice. But you know, one thing I never saw at an AA meeting is people handing around a Mickey. I think someone might have talked to them, say, you know what, this is not the time or place to hand over and pass around, your alcohol. Maybe as Christians, it's time for us to stop handing out alcohol to each other as Christians on social media, saying, does this make you angry? This should make you very angry. Maybe it's time we stop hanging out and handing out our anger-fueled drugs to each other. Colossians 3:8. But now you must also rid yourself of all such things as these: anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips. Those first four are all about anger, really. If I got up here this morning and I started swearing and using told a couple off-color jokes, some of you might have thought, Vern, I think you might want to take another 3 months off. But if I got up here this morning and was really angry and some of you might say, yeah, he's telling it like it is, he's telling the truth. God lumps all of those together. There's Christian leaders even now who are saying we need to live angry in an angry world. That is not the way of Jesus. I started 2021 with a simple phrase, and I'll end with this, that I wanted to exude 2021, and it was this: chase the joy. I want to chase the joy that God has for me this year. But I've come to realize I can't experience joy if I have no peace in my life. See, you can't have joy if you don't have peace preceding it. But I've also realized that I can't have any peace if I'm walking around with an IV hooked up to anger. I'm not going to experience peace, and I'm certainly not going to experience joy. So, I will leave it at that. I've been sitting on this for 3 months, so forgive me, it's probably gone a little long. But I just want to say, we are in good hands with God. We are in safe hands. All of us recognize part of our lives where we go, you know what? God, I need to come and learn a different way of living in some of these areas. And if you say that, God says, I'd love to teach you. I'd love to walk with you, melt away that anger, and give you a new way of living. Jeff, do you want to come up and add something?